For more on the polls, we now cross to SABC News Correspondent Stuart Smith. Stuart, a very good afternoon to you. So big news today as Britons are casting a historic vote today. How is polling so far going today?
We understand polling is going as expected. People are able to come in person, or some of them may have already voted via the postal vote system. 1/5 to 1/4, 20 to 25% of the votes in this election are expected to be by postal vote. So already many of people have made their decisions, but they still have 8 hours if they haven't already voted either by postal vote, proxy or in person. But then when polls close at 10 p.m, the elections officials will get down to counting immediately, which means we could, as early as Friday morning, have an idea of who will be the Prime Minister of the UK for the next 5 years, whether it's a continuation of the Conservative government under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, or whether it's the Labour Party leader Keir Starmer, as all of the polls, frankly, suggest will happen. And not just will happen, but with very high likelihood and with a strong majority. Some polls even predicting a historic win for the Labour Party, even greater than the 1997 success of Tony Blair, which previously has been seen as the benchmark for major success for the Labour Party. Both leaders are very keen to try to get their people, their supporters, out to vote. There is a sense amongst Labour Party supporters that this is a done deal, that the Labour Party will inevitably win, so there might not be any need to go out and vote. And the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, has been trying to spend this week convincing people that they must still come out, lest they wake up to Rishi Sunak entering the doors of Downing Street once again on Friday. Similarly, Rishi Sunak has been trying to get his Conservative voters to come out and vote, insisting it's not a lost cause, that there's everything still to play for. He's been quoting a poll this week that suggested 130,000 votes is all there is between a majority Labour Party and a hung Parliament. He is convinced that if he can get those votes, then the tide could turn. But it does, frankly, look very unlikely.
Interesting indeed, Stuart. I mean, maybe talk to us about the reasoning as to why some of the voters that will be casting their ballots in person actually have to present their IDs when they go and vote.
Yeah, it's a brand new rule that's only been introduced this year for this the first time at a general election, which means that people must show voting some form of ID. It could be a driving license, a passport, a pensioner's card that provides free bus travel, but it must be official and people cannot vote without it. And this was introduced by the Conservative government in order to crack down on what it claimed was election fraud. Now, the data showed there was actually only incredibly small amounts of election fraud taking place in Britain, but the Conservatives said that they needed to act to prevent any kind of doubt about the election result for future elections, with a view perhaps to the situation in the United States. Now, ironically, it was Boris Johnson, the former Conservative Prime Minister, who helped move that policy through. And during the local elections, he turned up to his local polling station without voter ID and had to be turned away to go back and get it. We don't yet have any numbers about to what extent that has happened during this general election. There was the local elections in May, which means at least that means for many people it's not the first time having to bring voter ID, but it is the first general election that requires it. And so polling officials are nervous that could dampen some of the turnout.
Very interesting indeed, Stuart. I thought you were going to mention Rishi's stance there on immigration. But in closing, I mean, some of the biggest challenges cited by Britons are, of course, economic stagnation, a crumbling healthcare system, and that thorny issue of, as I've just mentioned, immigration issues, among others. So what new policies is the current Conservative proposing to tackle these issues as compared to what Starmer's Labour Party is offering?
Yes, if we talk about immigration, it is a big part of this election for a couple of reasons. One is that the Conservative Party, initially by the time a general election was called, wanted to be able to say they'd started sending illegal immigrants to Rwanda. If you recall the Rwanda asylum scheme, where people that entered England illegally would be immediately taken to Africa for processing. Now, that has not actually got underway yet. So campaigners on the doorsteps cannot tell voters that Rishi Sunak's scheme is making progress. The Labour Party does concede illegal immigration is something it needs to tackle, but it would like to do that, it says, by giving more resources to the border force and working more closely with France to stop people getting here in the first place. But the other reason immigration is so important in this election is the right-wing Reform UK party, which is effectively splitting the Conservative vote. Those most upset with the immigration policy of the Conservatives and their perceived failure to tackle it correctly are turning to Reform UK. Now, that doesn't mean Reform, led by Nigel Farage, will necessarily get many seats, but it does mean that the vote will be split in some constituencies between two right-wing parties, giving Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, an even greater majority in the House of Commons. That's what polls predict.